Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Columbia video service entitled In the Broken World of Loss and Sorrow, a Grieving Circle service, led by Jeff Ordway and Maria Oropallo. What do you say when nothing will make it better? What does compassion look like in the face of grief, loss, and sorrow? How do we find ways to be present with one another in life's most painful moments? Join our newly formed Grieving Circle group to explore these important questions and more.
As I light our chalice, the symbol of this faith, the cup of community, and the flame of the human spirit, I invite you to join me in the unison opening words printed in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this church. This morning's service will be brought to you by our church's Grieving Circle, an important new ministry of presence and love to those who grieve any kind of loss of a person, of a relationship, of a job, or other kinds of loss. Our Grieving Circle meets twice per month, once in the daytime and once in the evening. And the leaders, Maria Oropallo, Barb Carter, Jeff Ordway, Greg Bergman, and myself, have committed to showing up whether anyone comes or not. Like firefighters or the best kinds of friends, the Grieving Circle is here when you need us. And like the best of friends, our Grieving Circle's commitment to you is compassion. The word compassion, from its Latin roots, literally means to suffer together or with. And that is our Grieving Circle's desire, to walk with you in times of pain. Our Grieving Circle will not fix you or rush you to resolve your feelings. We will be deeply present to whatever emotions you bring, and to the journey of grief, which is always ongoing. It is in the spirit of compassion and true presence that I invite you now into a brief moment of silence, to be still with each other and with the pain and beauty of our world and our lives. The silence will begin and end with the chime.
Please join me in the unison prayer printed in your order of service. Hold on to what is good, even if it's a handful of earth. Hold on to what you believe, even if it's a tree that stands by itself. Hold on to what you must do, even if it's a long way from here. Hold on to your life, even if it's easier to let go. Hold on to my hand, even if someday I'll be gone away from you. I invite you now into a time of embodied prayer. All who feel so moved are invited to come forward, take a stone to represent something happy or sad, or someone you're thinking of, and drop it into the water where our joys, sorrows, and prayers are held tenderly together. During this time, any of you, adults or kids, who are grieving, who are feeling sad about something, or someone you have lost, are invited to take a black armband to wear as a physical symbol of your grief. And then lean on your neighbor to get it tied onto your arm.
And now we will send our children out to their classes with their teachers. Kids, find your teacher with the sign color for your class. And we will sing them out with the song printed in your order of service.
Stop all the clocks. Cut off the telephone. Prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone. Silence the pianos and with muffled drum bring out the coffin. Let the mourners come. Let airplanes circle moaning overhead, scribbling on the sky the message, he is dead. Put crepe bows round the white necks of the public doves. Let traffic policemen wear black cotton gloves. He was my north, my south, my east and west, my working week and my Sunday rest. My noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. I thought that love would last forever, but I was wrong. The stars are not wanted now. Put out everyone. Pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. Pour away the ocean and sweep up the wood. For nothing now can ever come to any good.
Put out the stars. They are not wanted now. Compassion asks us to stay with pain and not to rush to resolve it or fix it. Compassion knows that our grief is a necessary response to our loss, and that our pain is the cost of the depth of our love. This is true with individuals who grieve, as our Grieving Circle members will show you with great depth this morning. And it is true when we encounter public grief and the pain of our world. This week, we have seen the power of public and prophetic grief on the campus of the University of Missouri, as students of color have directed our gaze to the history, cultures, and contemporary systems of oppression present in our campus, our town, our state, our country, and even written upon our own individual psyches. Part of the power for me of these students' witness is their refusal to be comforted. They have shown us their pain, and so doing, I dearly hope they have awakened and opened our hearts. It is ours now to have the compassion and the courage to stay present to pain. And even more so globally after this weekend, when we have seen our hearts torn open even further by terror, violence, tragedy, and then even compassion in Paris and in Beirut and in Baghdad, Syria, beyond. Our calling in this moment, with all of it, so myriad and so complex, is to stay open, stay willing, stay compassionate, even before the incredible pain of our world. In her poem, What They Did Yesterday Afternoon, Somali poet Warsan Shir writes, "They set my aunt's house on fire. I cried the way women on TV do, folding in the middle like a 5-pound note. I called the boy who used to love me, tried to okay my voice. I said hello. He said, "Warson, what's wrong? What happened?" I've been praying, and these are what my prayers look like. Dear God, I come from 2 countries. One is thirsty, the other is on fire. Both need water. Later that night, I held an atlas in my lap, ran my fingers across the whole world, and whispered, "Where does it hurt?" It answered, "Everywhere, everywhere, everywhere." We join our hearts in prayer on this day when our hearts hold so much. In a world that hurts everywhere, and in a world that is yet still so beautiful, so worthy of our love, even as our love guarantees our pain. On this day, we join our hearts in compassion, which is the commitment to stay present to it all. Grief and love, pain and hope, beauty and terror, sorrow and joy. And so I ask you to join your hearts with me now in the spirit of prayer or contemplation as you feel moved. Source of love, hold us in this time that is too full for words. Let us join our hearts in prayer for the student activists and their allies on the University of Missouri, with gratitude for their prophetic witness. Tears with their pain. Solidarity and the hope of protection when they are threatened. And commitment to allow our own hearts to be transformed by their truths. We join in prayer for university administrators, past and present, as they seek to bring the best of themselves to systems which are both within and beyond their control. We pray for the transformation of all our hearts, for it is only through each of us that systems are ever transformed. We join in prayer for all those suffering violence, terror, and unspeakable loss in Paris, in Beirut, in Baghdad, in Syria, in our very own cities. And we pray for those whose faith or background or skin color makes them suspect to our culture of fear every time extremists use religion or culture as a veil for their violent will to dominate. Let us pray for our Muslim siblings in faith in the potential backlash they now face. And let us pray for the millions of refugees across Europe, from Syria, Iraq, and so many other places. Who may now face new resistance even as they are displaced by the same extremists whose actions we now witness and abhor. Love, help us to be present and hold the pain of our world. And help us to witness and be present to each other, and the many joys and sorrows which live tenderly in our own lives and our own hearts.
Good morning. Where were you on April 19th, 1995, specifically at 9:01 a.m. Central Time? Do you remember? Is that day as memorable as the Kennedy's assassination, Martin Luther King's assassination? Is it a searing memory as the bombing of the Twin Towers on 9/11? Well, on that day, Rabbi Earl Grollman, rabbi of the Beth El Temple Center in Belmont, Massachusetts, was called to go to Oklahoma City after the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrow building. He was called all the way from Oklahoma to Massachusetts for two reasons. One, he is the author of many books, some of which our own Beacon Press publishes, on grief. One of his most famous is Living When a Loved One Has Died. The second reason Rabbi Grollman was called is because of the size of Oklahoma City and the fact that half of the people are Catholic and half are Protestant. So he felt like a good mediator to be there. With a touch and a smile and some memorable phrases, the rabbi offered tender treatment for the Oklahoma caregivers within the first few days. They hadn't yet found most of the bodies, but people were calling for peace, something. So he congregated at the Baptist Medical Center in the auditorium, and when he arrived, it was full to capacity. He thought he was seeing survivors, grievers, caregivers, first responders. To his amazement, he discovered that they were mostly veterans from the Vietnam War. The noise, the burning smell, the echoes of the blasts, the tangible agony of the residents of Oklahoma cities. They were reliving their war days. It's never over when it's over. It's never over when it's over. It's easy to meet someone and to say, "How are you?" But the hardest thing to do is to say goodbye to those we love. Rabbi Grollman goes on to say, death was not discussed in the home. In his experience, death wasn't even discussed in seminary. Death was something that was done within the congregation. In the early 90s, he began working on a grief team at Harvard. And while the list is quite long, I'm going to pick just a few of the things he says he learned. Grief is normal and natural. There's a psychiatric term called the crazies, which many grieving adults experience. I don't know what's wrong with me. I get up in the morning and I don't know where I'm going. I'm driving my car and I get lost. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I come to a red light and I forget whether that red light means stop or go. I forgot how to deposit money in a bank. There are some days that I forget my own name. After death, you can feel like a spectator in your own life. And he adds, or your own nightmare. Someone has died. People are moving in and out of your house. You walk around. You talk. You say, the Yankees are winning? What's happening in the news? My husband died. What am I talking about? You make conversation and everyone says, you're doing so well. You feel like a spectator. You can't believe what just happened. And you want to wake up knowing that it didn't really happen. Days and even months later, the phone will ring, and you'll say, maybe that's my husband. Maybe that's my child. You hear footsteps in the house, and you think the same thing. But what I'm saying is the head understands, but the heart refuses to acknowledge it. Grief is a process. Rabbi Grolman often says, it's never over. And for many people, the height of the depression is not at the moment of death. He speaks about being a grief counselor, and he said there is a problem that people are becoming aware of. Grief therapists can sometimes do more harm than good. They rush to a school shooting, to Oklahoma City, to Ground Zero, and try to help. But it doesn't help. Most people haven't yet processed what is really going on. As someone said to him, I'm grieving as quickly as I can. It's like a surgeon opening up a patient and then leaving them. We hear about closure. Grolman advises us to forget that word. There is no closure. It's never over when it's over. There's Mother's Day, Father's Day, a birthday, an anniversary. It's like a scar, he says. Later on, it might not be as red as it had been, but it's still there, hurting when you least expect it, because that's what love is about. Grief is love, never ready to say goodbye.
You're in pain because someone you care about is in pain. Sadness grips and threatens to overwhelm. The world struggles with its grief. You're looking for something to say that'll make a difference. Charlie Walton, in his book, When There Are No Words, Finding Your Way to Cope with Loss and Grief, says the following. Someone who loves you a lot wants desperately to lessen your pain. They're yearning for some magic words, for a few concise, over-the-counter phrases that can encapsulate all of human wisdom and explain away the pain you are feeling, since part of you has been ripped away without benefit of anesthesia. But there are no words. It's a phenomenon that's existed since the beginning of humanity, this trying to understand how to make things better for someone you care about. Trying to find words that show that you care and realizing that there's not anything you can say that will adequately do so. My father passed away in March, so I know what it's like to listen to people trying to help. Then my wife's father passed away in May. I got to experience the other side of it, trying to find words that mean something so I could help ease her pain. And then a couple of days ago, we hear about the attacks that have been taking place worldwide and the incredible loss of life. I've watched as people try to make sense of it, listen to them, read their words. It's been a struggle. You see, we as a society, we don't have a common language for grief. We just don't. We turn to our faith traditions to find some semblance of a language, but differing traditions use different ways to express condolences. What is helpful to one faith can actually be painful to people of another faith. And I want to give you an example, a personal example of something that did not go over the way it was intended. At my father's funeral, there was a time for friends and family to come forward to speak. Many did. And one of those who came forward, a friend of my father's, came to the pulpit and reached out his hand to where my family was sitting. With great passion, he told us, Jesus is with you right now. He's holding you in his arms and he's loving you. It's obvious that this man meant well and that he was saying words that he truly felt were supporting and helpful. What he didn't know, that this group of family, 10 people, contained 4 UUs, an atheist, an agnostic, and only 4 Christians. So he thinks he's being helpful, yet his words are falling on deaf ears for over half the group. And in some cases, some members of my family were even more upset. So how do we find words and phrases that will actually help instead of ones that cause additional pain or even cause damage? What can be done or said that is supportive? Mr. Walton says there are no words, but on this I disagree with him a little bit. I understand his feeling that in the deepest part of grief, there truly are no words. However, I think that there actually are words that can be used. There's one phrase that to me holds great meaning, even in the darkest of times. And that phrase is simply, I'm here. Not I'm here for you, or even I'm here to help. Just I'm here. And then be there. Being present is the greatest gift. As someone grieving, knowing that in your heart someone is there, that's one of the few things in my experience that lightens the load. You won't have to tell anyone how sorry you are for their loss, because they'll already know, because you're there with them. You won't have to ask them what they need, because you'll already know, because you're there with them. A man named Tim Lawrence has a blog entitled, The Adversity Within, Shining Light on Dark Places. He recently wrote an entry to that blog entitled, Everything Doesn't Happen for a Reason. In it, he talks about grief and being supportive of someone when they're going through it, and it's truly one of the most powerful pieces of writing that I have read in quite some time. And since his eloquence far exceeds my own, I'm going to end with an excerpt from this excellent piece. The most powerful thing you can do is acknowledge. Literally, say the words, I acknowledge your pain, and I am here with you. Note that I said with you, not for you. For implies that you're going to do something. That's not for you to enact. To stand with your loved one, to suffer with them, to listen to them, to do everything but something is incredibly powerful. There is no greater act than acknowledgement, and acknowledgement requires no training, no special skills, no expertise. It only requires the willingness to be present with a wounded soul, to stay present as long as is necessary. Be there. Only be there. Do not leave when you feel uncomfortable or when you feel like you're not doing anything. In fact, it is when you feel uncomfortable and you feel like you're not doing anything that you must stay. Because it's in those places, in the shadows of horror that we rarely allow ourselves to enter, where the beginnings of healing are found. This healing is found when we have others who are willing to enter that space alongside us. Every grieving person on earth needs these people. And so thus I beg you, I plead with you to be one of these people. You are more needed than you will ever know.
My piece today is on the role of faith in grief. I have always despised the sentimental because it feels like a familiar weakness. But when the worst imaginable happens, like the death of my 25-year-old daughter, I went to the darkest place a human being can be. That is grief. People in grief are at their very worst. After we go through the gatherings, the memorial services, the food, the cards, the flowers, there were days when I could scarcely speak, when I could scarcely breathe, not being able to put one foot in front of the other, breaking down. We eventually learn to tolerate those feelings. They come in waves, ebb and flow, grief and sadness, a multitude of feelings. There was, or rather, there still is, panic. What do I do? How do I go on living? Do I want to go on living? And what the hell does faith have to offer me? Before I go on, there are a few things you need to know. I'm an atheist, have always been one. The second thing you need to know is that this part of the service may be somewhat PG-13 because of language. I'm not going to apologize. I have and have always had a potty mouth. If there's one thing I've learned through my grief, is that I now have the courage to be my authentic self. And that self has anger at the unfairness in life. I will be blunt, because clarity is what is needed. Tom Zuba, a friend and author of Permission to Mourn, a grief counselor, wrote, "Kids know how to mourn. We should follow their lead. How do you mourn? Are you allowing the world to silence you and keep you small? Or are you shouting from the mountaintops, 'Someone I love died. He or she matters. I matter, and I will continue to say their name regardless of how it makes you feel.'" The third thing is my definition of faith, which is that faith is a covenant, a sacred agreement. Faith, church, allows us to bring our most fragile selves and wear it on the outside, much like the black band many of us are wearing today. My fragile self, right here. And fourth, my Amy died 8 years ago. In your world. In my world, it was last night. I am still looking for an answer, for relief, for peace, so that I could go on living in my new normal. So I'm going to share a story. There was a woman walking around in a parking lot. She was a little hunched over due to the weight of the bags she was carrying in each hand. The bags were filled with fruits and sweets and baked goods, juice and flavored water. Each item had been carefully selected to bring a bit of joy, a moment of happiness. As she approaches her car, hot, stinging tears curse a burning trail down her cheeks. Before she could stop herself, a long, low, "No!" spills out. Shocked by the sound of her own voice, tears overfilling her eyes, she looks up at the sky, and a plaintive "please" fills the space around her. She sees the other shoppers, quickly clicking their key fobs and hurrying into their cars. She stops, embarrassed, and suddenly feels very weak. At her car, she places the grocery bags next to the Target bags that are already in the trunk. Plush robe, fluffy slippers, shampoo and conditioner, and the latest best-selling 600-page novel that she knew was on her daughter's Amazon wish list. The last few weeks, she had developed her own wish list. How long does it take to read a 600-page novel? Wishful thinking. As she slips into her seat, she begins to pray, looking for relief from the pain, using prayer as how she understands it. Normally a nurturing kind of meditation. In careful, measured tones, she says, "Take me, please." She doesn't deserve this. She's young. Her life is just starting. Her husband, her baby, her sister still need her. Please. She implores this imagined image of sacred scripture, God on his throne, sitting above and beyond her suffering. In Lamentations 5:22, we read, "Turn us back, O Lord, to you, and we will return, looking for grace, for reconciliation, for relief." There is silence. Another breath. A slight embarrassment crosses her face, and her mind goes back to 4 years, in another emergency room where her 17-year-old daughter is being carried out of an ambulance, broken nearly in half by the weight of the detached car door that had landed on her pelvis. Medics whispering, a bargain offered. "Please, let her survive. I'll do anything." Rabbi Grolman says the purpose of religion is to help guide our way to answers of 3 questions: why we are born, why we are here, and where do we go after we die? Why is the question, a 3-letter word broken down into microsyllables carrying a big, wet, messy sound. Why? She asks again as she pounds the dashboard. Of course, you know that woman was me. I was in Richmond, Virginia, after being in 4 different hospitals and knowing that a medical decision to take the baby at 26 weeks might give Amy a 30% chance to live, or the surgery would kill her. My mind couldn't accept what was going on, so I went shopping. It was all I had left. To be with someone in grief is to see them 5, 10, 15 years after the death of a loved one. And it means you understand that they are now living in a parallel universe. Their mind always retreats to another universe where their loved one would have been present. I've tried to figure out what Amy would look like now at 33 years old, how we would share her delight at the precocious imaginative child she brought into the world. I sometimes imagine her gently caressing the face of her husband, but mostly I see her stealing clothes and makeup from her sister Rebecca's closet, teasing her about her latest love interest and looking deeply into Becca's eyes and seeing their shared past, the only 2 born of me and their father, sharing stories of our family, our legends, the only 2 who knew that as teens, things were going to be okay as they gradually accepted Jack's love as their stepfather. I sat in my car paralyzed. I had never felt anything that approached that almost fatal paralysis, that overwhelming feeling of grief. Why is the question. Rabbi Grolman says he never argues theology in a house of bereavement. I took a deep breath, and in the quiet, an answer. Shit happens. And this is shit, and it's the worst kind of shit. Grief is a reaction to loss. Its outcome is complete and utter change of our normal. How does one support someone in grief? In our grieving circle, we show up, we stand beside them, we say, I don't know how you are feeling, but I am here.
Sometimes grief is harsh and raw, tearing at us in every waking moment. And sometimes, at first, we are in such shock that we can't even comprehend the damage that has been done to us. Sometimes grief can stagnate, keep us drowning in a pool of sorrow, long past the point of emotional health. Sometimes grief is softened by time and is called back by a new grief. That has happened recently in our family. When I received a call on a Friday evening telling me that my brother had been admitted to the hospital with angina. Steve is about 3 months older than my dad was when he died of a massive heart attack. And so we were not only dealing in our family with the possibility of losing my brother, but all of that fear and pain from my father's death returned to all of us. Whether your grief is new and raw, or whether it is old and pulled back into your life by some new event, we're here for you. We are willing to listen. One of the things I'd like you to know is the Grieving Circle is indeed for those with new loss, but it's also for those losses in the past. And it's for the times when maybe you're having trouble letting go of a loss. We're not therapists, we're not counselors, we don't have a magic bullet that will make it all better. What we can do is listen and be here with you. There can be grief over losses other than death as well. The loss of a relationship, of a job, of a dream, of our health. All of those things that are out of our control can be very hurtful, beyond any imagining. We're also here to listen to those kinds of sorrows. We're also here to mourn those things with you. Come be with us and speak what is the feelings in your heart. It seems odd, but sometimes, even when something good is happening in our lives, sometimes there's sorrow with that as well. Perhaps you're getting married to somebody that you absolutely adore, or there's a new child in your life, or a dream has been fulfilled. And yet, perhaps there's a loss of childhood. Perhaps there's a loss of freedom. Perhaps there's a loss of time and energy that are now going to a new thing. At this point in my life, that's kind of happening with me. I'm moving closer to town from my home 15 miles out in the country. There are many good reasons for that, and I'm expecting it to have a very positive impact on my life. But still, I like the solitude of being in the country. And now I'm going to have neighbors within a few feet of my home. And I'm not going to be able to walk out my front door and wander through the woods because that's where they are. And my son's ashes, some of them were scattered at the lake on that land. The new people will not know that Tony was there, or about the many hours he and his friends spent fishing in that lake. Those losses also sometimes need to be spoken, and we are here for you. There are other losses that might not be as appropriate for the Grieving Circle, but as a community, we need to talk about them. The events here in Columbia in the last few weeks, the conversations I had after church last week were really important to me as we talked about what was happening on the campus. And I heard other people expressing my same confusion and my same questions, and I found that very comforting. On an upside, we've gone to 2 services, and there have been consequences to that, including the potlucks. And we're having potlucks to talk about how to manage the potlucks. Okay, we don't want to talk about that in Grieving Circle, but there is an emotional impact there. There is a feeling of loss for many of us. And we do need to be talking to each other. We need to be speaking to one another and finding a way to live with these changes and stay together and know that sometimes we're going to disagree with each other, and that's okay. Join us at Grieving Circle and in chalice circles and at potlucks. And we are here with each other, and I hope we will continue to be here with each other. In that I find comfort.